Hi, this is Sandy Anderson, and I will be presenting a little bit today about People First Language. And kind of just before we get started, I just kind of want you to reflect back on your own experiences, your own learning, thinking back specifically kind of to childhood. Was there a time that you recall maybe a teacher or a staff member referring to you by a name in which you didn't prefer? Maybe for me, I know that mine was always the big kid. And those words definitely stuck and resonated with me. And that kind of just gives our framework for what we will be discussing today. I love the age-old analogy of toothpaste. You can't put the words you choose back in your mouth. I've done this task with kids before in the past where they squeeze the toothpaste out and then they have to try to put it back in. And it's just a good way for us to remember that once we speak words, we can't take them back. And so it's very important for us to choose those words wisely, to be incredibly considerate of everyone we encounter on all different levels, not just what we will be addressing today, but really just every single day. It's a great way to live when you think through the words that you choose. Today specifically, we're going to be discussing People First Language. So when you hear that phrase, it could sound scary, like, oh no, I have to learn another way to speak. And really, it's much more simple than that. What is People First Language? People First Language is identifying each person as a human first before identifying what disability they may have. And so that's considering when we speak about others, that we are always making sure that we recognize that they are a human being who exists first. They're a mother, father, brother, son, friend. There's so much more than a disability that they might have. So today we're just going to discuss maybe a few ways that we've spoken in the past that could make someone with a disability feel marginalized or maybe as though they're being discriminated against, and just little ways that we can change our words and choose them wisely to help create a much more inclusive culture for everyone to exist in. When we consider People First Language, we kind of have to think about words that we currently use. Some of those words or phrases might include special education student, a disabled person, nonverbal child, autistic child, learning disabled child, handicapped child, ADHD child, diabetic child, insane or crazy person. I know that these are all words that I've used before to describe people, whether it be in conversations with adults. I hope and pray that I have not used these specifically with children, but I know I've been guilty of saying these things, not for a lack of compassion, but just not knowing that sometimes when we choose to identify a student based on their disability first, before who they actually are, the level of emotional impact that that could have upon them. Another phrase that we often use with children in the classroom or in meetings might be the following term. We might just say, well, they're just a normal kid. And that's something we definitely need to consider and evaluate, because every time we refer to someone as a normal kid, we refer to others as not if they are not just like them. So I'd also like to address that in different language that we could use to create a more inclusive culture in our schools. So some of that new language. Simple changes to the language can produce big results for creating an inclusive people-first language. But when I say this, it's because it really is simple. A lot of it is about the ordering in which we choose to use our words, hence the title People First Language. We identify who that person is before we identify any disabilities or abilities that they might have. That might sound like a child without a disability. When we consider, instead of using the phrase normal, we could say that a child without a disability in the classroom is one simple way that we can change them. Saying things such as Jack receives special education services rather than referring to a kid as a special education student I know this is one I want to be very intentional about working on. And the way that it sounds, I understand how this makes kids feel better, makes parents feel better, because it really does hit your ears differently when you hear the name of the child first. A few others that we can consider different ways to say is, instead of disability person, she is a person with a disability of. When we say that a child is nonverbal, we could say that he communicates with maybe sign language or other forms of communication. Instead of saying an autistic child, we could say Jane has a diagnosis of autism. Instead of referring to a child with a learning disability child, we could say Kay is a child with a learning disability. Mark is a person with a handicap rather than a handicapped person. Josh has a diagnosis of ADHD. I would say this is one that I hear the most within buildings that I've worked in. The ADHD kids, or just those hyperactive kids, I've heard them referred to often. And it really is demeaning to those kids as individuals. They really are being identified only by their diagnosis and not who they really are. Instead of saying a diabetic child, you could say Sarah has been diagnosed with diabetes. And as well as, instead of saying that person is crazy or insane, you could say that Sandy has a mental health condition. This is all just language that really helps us to create a more inclusive environment, to not hurt these kids emotionally, or adults even, any more than what they might already experience from others. And it's so simple that I think we can all together make this change and hold each other accountable. Some just things to remember as you think about this language is that it's okay if you forget. All right, so we learn just like everyone else learns in our building, and you might forget sometime. It's important for us to hold each other accountable when we do forget, not in a way of criticizing one another, but in a way of helping one another and holding each other accountable to really just do what's best for all children and make them feel more invited and included in our learning environment. Persons with any disability are always a person first. This is definitely a shift that we all need to make sure that we have in our perception of the students in which we work with. They are and will always be a person first before they are ever their disability. When we know better, we need to do better. There's no purpose in dwelling on what we have or have not done in the past, but when we learn that little changes like this can lead for great impacts for all of our students in their future and their emotional well-being and successes, we need to do better. And so from here forward, I open the door for each and every one of you to hold me accountable to these types of language. If you ever hear me use any language that is not a person-first language, please know that you absolutely have the right to correct me on that. And I want to do better, but sometimes I know the only way I do better is through learning and practice. So please help me. I will continue to do the same, and I believe that we can all vow to do that for each other. So thank you for taking the time to listen today, and thank you for making this one small change that can really change our environment, the way in which we view and address kids, and also the way we're modeling for all students that might be without a disability in our classrooms. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.